As many of you already know, I'm just and this is the closing event. 2024's 22nd festival. There's two numbers that are too close to each other. And so it's been a really fun and hopefully enlightening and entertaining weekend. And I'm glad that you are all here to close it out. We hope that you'll enjoy it and we hope that you'll provide us some feedback. The link to our online survey, as you probably know, is on sbhumanities.org, but you can also find it on festival QR codes and the different information tables that you can take all weekend. And the last time I will say this is that you can help keep the festival free by making a tax-deductible donation to the Subsequent Humanities Council. To donate, you can visit sbhumanities.org, where you can use the slips available right out at our information booth. And with your gift, you get to enter our drawing for our festival guide cover image by working with artist Chuck Venice, one on my t-shirt today. It's beautiful, large print, and $50 gets you your first entry and $10 for each entry after that. So beautiful, beautiful in your home or office. This festival would not be possible without the generous support of the numerous organizations and individuals who have already donated and are acknowledged on the back cover of the festival guide. And if we do happen to have any partners in sponsors in the room, should we stand? Don't think we do, but I've seen them running around all weekend. We appreciate that very much. All right, and I want to mention before we start that Kao Kalia Yang's books are available for purchase in the lobby, and she will be glad to sign them for you after her presentation. And as I mentioned, you can stroll the garden, and at 1 o'clock, the gardens party on the porch will start. So there will be music, more food, more beverages, and all sorts of entertainment on this beautiful day. Today's program is called Finding My Voice, Sharing Family Stories. And it features Kao Kalia Yang, who was born in a refugee camp in Thailand and came to America at age 6. She writes books for adults, including the memoirs The Late Homecomer and Where Rivers Part, and for children, most recently, The Rock in My Throat. Yang is also a filmmaker, teacher, and co-founder of Words Wanted, which helps immigrants with writing, translating, and business services. And when not traveling, speaking, and inspiring social change and awareness, she raises a daughter and 2 sons with her husband in Minneapolis. So please welcome Kao Kalia Yang.
With the music, do I just
Might
Right.
have to escape briefly from that.
perfect? We can start the music and then I will.
Start.
Perfect. All points. Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, beautiful people. Can you all see me? I'm delighted to be here, and I think there's no better way to meet a writer than with her words. So I'm going to begin immediately with a reading from The Rock in My Throat. The book came out in March of this year, and we debuted it at the Mall of America, Rotunda, because Britney Spears was there, and I've always wanted to be there. And so the forces of the world converged, and lo and behold, it happened. And I think it's a perfect place to begin in a talk titled Finding My Voice. The soundtrack that you're hearing is from Jocelyn Hagen, who is an incredible composer. We teamed up together for the Song Poet Opera, one of my books, which Minnesota Opera commissioned as an opera. I can see some of you can't see me, so I'll stand here. And so last year it debuted. It was the first Minnesota opera to have a sold out main stage production 6 months before premiere. But with that, this is The Rock in My Throat by Kao Kalia Yang, illustrated by G. Malin. My dedication. For everyone who has trouble speaking, trouble being heard, for everyone who has lived without understanding on their side, G. May's dedication. For my parents, The Rock in My Throat. I'm going to move this beautiful setup. Recess is the hardest time of the day. All the kids are playing. Some are on the playground and others are in the fields by the side of the school. There's a group on the pavement in front of me. The teachers are all busy watching over the kids and talking. I look at the sky. I look at the ground. I look at my feet. I look at my hands. I look all around so the people can't see that I'm lonely. I'm relieved when I see a feather on the ground. It is a gray feather, a small one, like dandelion fluff, only a little bigger. I pick it up. It is soft in my hands. It is mysterious. I hold it in one hand. I touch it with my other. I study it. I'm more interested in the feather today than I was interested in the leaf yesterday. After school, I tell my mother about the sky and the ground. I tell her my feet are small, but my hands might grow large. I tell her about the feather I found, the feather I have in my pocket. My mother says in Hmong, her words make me stop talking. I feel the feather in the pocket of my jeans become smaller and smaller. Inside my pocket, my right hand reaches for the place where the feather is, afraid that it will disappear. Later, I look at my mother across the table from me. I would never tell her about the moment I decided to stop talking if I can help it. I don't want to be like the many people who speak English. There's a rock in my throat now, and it grows heavier by the day. I don't want to be like the woman in the store, the woman who tapped her hand on the counter when my mother tried to ask where the light bulbs were, but didn't know the English words, the one who looked away when she said, I'm looking for the thing that makes the world shiny. The English words in my mother's mouth were sweet and sticky like candy, and they wrapped themselves up in her teeth. Her tongue tried to free the words, but it took time. Time that the English speaking people don't have. That day, the woman grew bigger and bigger behind the counter. My mother and I grew smaller and smaller in front of it. Now I blink and blink and blink. Across the dining table, I shrug at my mother, letting my shoulders go up and then down. I say, Gucci. At first, no one noticed when I stopped talking at school. I continued to sit at my assigned desk. I continued to keep my desk clean, my hands to myself. I continued to keep my eyes on the teacher at the front of the classroom. One day, our teacher is sick. We have a substitute who looks a lot like our teacher. She doesn't know who any of us are, but she has a list with our names on it. She calls them one by one. My last name starts with a Y, and I know I'm last. I try to clear my throat. I listen as all the kids say here when their names are called. Trying to get the air out of my mouth feels like I'm pushing my heart up into my throat. When the teacher says Kao Yan, I really try to say here, but the only sound I'm able to make is a shaking cough. She says louder, scanning the room, trying to find me among the desks. The teacher finds me because all the other children are looking at me. They are not all mean looks. A few of them, the nice ones, show on their faces that they hurt a little for me. I dig into the carpet of our classroom with the tip of my shoes. I want the floor to open up and suck me down through the thin carpet, through the thick cement, through the pipes, through the basement, through the ground, all the way to the core of the earth, so that the burning in my face would feel cool next to the plasma underneath everything. Instead, I raise my hand, feeling the heat rise from my throat. The substitute looks at me and smiles. Next time, speak a little louder. All day long, the volume of my listening to her voice is turned up on high. I can't focus on the math problems on my worksheet. When it is free writing time, I can't write anything at all. Every time she asks a question, I look away so she doesn't ask me anything. I'm exhausted when I get home. I'm exhausted every day after that. I'm exhausted every time I go to school. I'm exhausted every time we're in the world that speaks English. The only place I'm able to rest is at home. Everyone at home speaks Hmong. My mother, my father, my older sister, and my aunts and uncles and cousins when they visit. Everyone speaks normally to everyone else. It is a song, uninterrupted, and it flows and flows. It is time for parent-teacher conferences. The teacher sits on one side of the table. My father, mother, older sister, and I sit on the other. The teacher wants to know, does Kao speak at home? My sister says in Hmong. This teacher also wants to know if Kalia speaks at home. My father and mother look at each other, and then my mother says, tell her Kalia speaks all the time. My sister says in English, my mother wants me to tell you that at home Kao speaks all the time. The teacher bites her bottom lip a little and flattens the line of her mouth, looking at me like I'm a puzzle. The teacher stops biting her bottom lip and the corners of her mouth lift in a smile. She says, Kao is doing well in everything, but she won't talk at school. I turn the volume of my listening down. I focus on the wall behind my teacher's head. I imagine the concrete crumbling and the world outside coming in. The birds, the wind, the leaves touching at their tips. They're clapping for me, but the hands in my lap are clasped tight together. In the car on the way home, my family is quiet. Once in a while, my father looks at me through the rearview mirror. My mother turns her head to check on me. My sister pats my hand. They all feel bad for me. I feel bad for all of us. Our brown car coughs into the air every few seconds. Puffs of smoke rise behind us. No one says anything. I know we all have rocks in our throats, and each of us is trying our best. The problem is that mine has grown too big and heavy for me to move. Recess is the worst time of the day. The pebble I picked up is the size of the tip of my little finger. Its surface is gray, but it has speckles of white. In the light of the sun on my palm, the white sparkles like diamonds. It is the most interesting thing I have ever seen in my life. The girl in front of me speaks very clearly and slowly. She says, do you want to play with me? All of my heart wants to play with her, but the weight of the rock is too heavy for my tongue to lift. My throat works, but the words don't come out. The rock grows bigger and bigger as the seconds pass. I don't know how to dislodge it, so I grip the little pebble in my palm. I don't look at her, and I shake my head, no. When she walks away, I repeat her name again and again. Julia, Julia, Julia Chang, I tell myself. One day, maybe she can be my friend. And that is 7-year-old Galia standing outside of the McDonough Housing Project in St. Paul, Minnesota. That is selective mute Galia smiling for the camera her father holds. I'm going to read to you from the author's note because it's a little small. And I'll step up so those of you on the other side can also see me. I was 6 years old and my family came to America as refugees of war from the camps in Thailand. For the first years of my life, Hmong was the language that I had built my home in. When I entered school, English was everywhere. Slowly, I picked it up in bits and pieces. I liked the way the words tasted different in my mouth, the way they did not need more air to float, the way they connected to one another, not like words holding hands, but like magnets and metal. Everything changed when I was 7 years old. I became a selective mute in English halfway between first and second grade. I stopped talking at school. I got by with nodding and doing the thumbs up. In fact, I wouldn't speak in English voluntarily until I went to college. In college, I learned how to whisper. When I became a writer, some of my childhood teachers came to my events to hear my voice. They knew me, they all said I hadn't changed much, but they had never heard me talk before. A few of them wept, hearing my voice for the first time. One of the big questions in all of my years of silence was why. At 43 years old, I'm finally ready to answer. This book is that answer. I'm answering the children who asked the question directly and sincerely all those years ago when I couldn't answer them. The children who were trying to understand. I'm answering the children who, like me, were also quiet and weren't sure why or were afraid of hurting the people around them with their honest answers. I want each child who is afraid to talk, unable to find the words, to know that sometimes it takes a long time for us to understand and an even longer time to express ourselves. I'm answering the question for the second grade child, who was me, young Kalia, who wanted and wished desperately to one day be able to answer this question for herself, her teachers, and especially her family. Mother, you used to say, I don't understand why you won't speak at school. I used to tell you, I don't know either. Mother, I can tell you now. As a child, I saw the people who spoke fluent English walk away from your efforts to be understood, and I felt your pain. I couldn't protect you, so I did the only thing I knew to do. I stopped talking in English. It was my great revolution against a world I knew was not listening to you. I couldn't control when the rock in my throat started weighing me down. I felt sad and sorry that I couldn't speak for myself or for you for so many years. But those years have come and gone. I now know that sometimes the words that I cannot speak into the world, I can write into it. Now, when I think back to all those silent years when I listened and listened, I'm filled with gratitude for all the lessons I learned. I'm thankful that I know to be patient when others are struggling into language. I understand so well what it is like to be lonely, and in the end, to love and appreciate the people who offer friendship. Julia Chang became my friend, first through the letters that we wrote to each other, and then later through the life experiences we shared. And that is obviously nonfiction. It is obviously a story of my life. In every classroom across the state, across this country, around the world, there are selective mute students. There are students who, for whatever reason, cannot control the fact that there's a rock lodged in their throat. And I think it took me a long time to have the courage to write this book. But that time was not wasted. I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't listened all of those long years through. You know, when you don't talk, you learn how to play with the volume of your listening. You learn that sometimes we're vehicles for each other's stories, and that the future is a place that many of us will not see, but it will through our words and our stories that we adventure there. I'm so honored to be here as the closing keynote to this incredible celebration of stories, celebration of human life, human curiosity, human love. I'm here not because I have answers, but I'm here because I'm continually asking myself questions. How do you live responsibly? How do you tell the stories that will make a people better? How do I tell the next chapter of the great American story? My journey into writing began a long time ago. I'm 43. I started on the journey at the age of 22 because of an old woman who could not read or write. My grandmother, Jolie, had never been to school. And so all of my life with her in America, she signed her name with a shaky X that stood in for Jolie. Her dream was always that one day I might go to school and become an educated person, whatever that meant. I, born in a refugee camp, born in a place where there were men with guns to hold us in, who thought for the first 6 years of her life that perhaps all of the world is a refugee camp. What is this educated person? But we came to America and I went to school and I saw a pathway forward. And my grandma, she used to talk to me about the day I would graduate. But June of 2003, when I would graduate, my grandma was not there with me. That February, she took a fall. And I went to her and I told her, Grandma, get up. And my grandma looked at me and she said to me, Menai, you have to understand that there were people who loved me before you. Before you, I had a mom and a dad, brothers and sisters, my most precious baby girl. My grandma said, while there is no Hmong land in the map of a bigger world, I'm going to climb this Hmong mountain. It lives in my heart. I'm going to swing open that door to the house of my youth. Dinner will be ready. Everybody will be waiting. And they will look up and they will say, why are you so late in coming home? My grandma told me that it would be selfish of me to cry for her to stay. So naturally, I cried for her leaving. I cried a lot, but the flow of my tears could not stop her great adventure. After my grandma died, I started writing her love letters. Because of my aunts and uncles, when they went through all of my grandma's stuff, and my grandma had 13 suitcases, and she carried these 13 suitcases from the house of one child to the other. None of them could afford a house big enough so that grandma could have a room of her own. And so my mom and my aunts, after my grandma died, went through her 13 suitcases, and they were astounded that in the 13th one, it was just full of love letters that my older sister Dao and I had written her when she lived in California and we lived in Minnesota, and we didn't have long distance phone plans and no cell phones. We couldn't afford the distance calls. So we used to write her love letters. And our thing was that if we pressed hard enough, because grandma couldn't read, that she would feel our love. And when they flipped through those letters, they flipped through this postcard that I sent my grandma when I was doing a study abroad in Thailand. And they flipped it over, and I saw that my grandma had read the postcard so many times with her hands that the ink had run off. And all you could see was how hard I pressed into the page. And so at the age of 22, I thought, if I write everything in my heart out, then maybe somehow I would learn how to live without my grandma. So that's what I set to do. I was too young to understand that across the rest of my life, I would continue to write my grandma, and that the letters would say the same thing. Dear Grandma, how are you? I don't know where you are, but here the people think that I don't have you. But I know I do. What do you do with your everyday? Do you still remember me, your granddaughter Kalia from Minnesota? They say the same things. I still write these letters. But I was on page 37 because there was a lot I wanted to say to my grandma, a lot of things that I would never forget. For example, one of her earlobes was torn because she'd been chased by a tiger in the jungles of Laos. And so I wanted to tell her I would never forget. Or the fact that my grandma, all of my life with her, only had a single tooth. And the dentists in America, they couldn't create dentures for her unless they pulled out that single tooth because it was too long and they just couldn't do it. But my grandma used to say, it's the only thing that my parents gave me standing strong in my mouth. No, no. But with that single tooth, we took down ice cubes in hot summer and Jolly Ranchers when we were lucky, and we gnawed on bones. So there was a lot. And I was on page 37, and my dad walks into the room and he says, what are you doing? And I said, I'm writing my final letter to Grandma. My father looks at me for a little bit and he says, do you know that if you dream in the right direction, the dreamer never wakes, the dream never dies. It grows bigger and bigger, may I? Then he left the room. And I started thinking, what if I turn this love letter into a book? What if one day, if I'm lucky enough to grow old and I become an old woman, what if my memories grow wings and they start flying far away from me? Wouldn't it be nice to be anchored in her story and her love? So at the age of 22, I became a writer. That first book was The Late Homecomer, and it set me on a journey that would eventually bring me right here to Brookings, South Dakota. I'm now 13 books deep, and this year is a 4-book release year. Um, Because after this one, I wrote Cage, which I would read on my closing keynote. Um, because we live in a world where there are a lot of refugee children coming from all around into our schools, into our communities. Because while it shouldn't be this way, not all children are lucky enough to be born free. We know this. And so this book came out in May. And I should say one thing. Authors don't get to control when their books come out. We don't. Um, but sometimes the world, again, the forces that are come together and certain things happen. This year, this book came out and it is called Where Rivers Part. If you know my work, you probably know The Late Homecomer, and then The Song Poet, My Father's Story, and finally, this is My Mother's Story. It closes the family trilogy that I've been working on since the age of 22. In between each, there was 8 years, and I understand that every year all the cells in our body change. So it's taken a lot of transformations to get here, but I wouldn't be honoring the legacy of my work, the title of this talk, if I didn't read to you a little bit from Rivers Park. All you need to know is that my mother is called Ju Mo. This book is in her voice. She was born in a little village in Laos called Dechua, where rivers meet. And on this little island village, her father was a farmer. And so they had great citrus orchards. As a girl, my mother was lucky enough to be the only girl in her village to go to school. So my mother was literate long before a lot of Hmong women had that privilege and that opportunity. Of course, the war happens. America's fighting a war in Vietnam, and they cross over and they're fighting a secret war in Laos. And too many American lives have been lost, and so they sent 32,000 Hmong men and boys to fight and to die on America's. And although my mom was not a soldier and my dad was too young, though there were kids 10, 11, 12 years old fighting that. When the bombs started falling in Sinkwang, Laos, because Laos was the most heavily bombed nation in the world, only the world didn't know it. My mom and dad, their families fled into the jungles of Laos. And there they got to meet. She was 16 and he was 19. And my dad thought, who is this person? They met on a trail and she had beads in her hair. And my dad says, this is a war where people are no longer wearing shoes. Who is this person with beads in their hair? And my dad smiled and my mom thought, everybody's brushing their teeth with burnt banana peels. But this young person has perfect white teeth. She thought he had perfect white teeth for a while. Took her a while to see that his two front teeth were overlapped just a little, but she thought he had perfect white teeth. And so they fall in love like young people do, even in a war. And they visit her family group. And my mom thinks there are other visits, but there's a big group of communist soldiers coming, searching out the Hmong. And my dad says to her, "We have to run." And my mom says, "No, I still want to eat dinner because I'm hungry." And my mom's about to go get water from a stream to make dinner. And my father and my mother start arguing. And my mother's embarrassed because her siblings and everybody can hear them. And so she stops arguing. And her mother, hearing the commotion, stops on her way out of the camp. And she's waiting there with a water pail at her feet. And my dad says, we have to go if we don't want to be divided from my family group. So my mother lets my father pull her away, and she never sees her mother again. It's the night that has stayed with her all of my life with her. And so I'm lucky enough that almost every Saturday I get to see my mom. Um, but I understand that not everybody is so lucky. And so I wrote this book for this woman to bring her back to that jungle in Laos, this woman who has loved me so tenderly, whose arms were my pillow long before I knew the softness of a pillow. I wrote it for my mom. So I'm going to read a little bit from Where Rivers Part for you all. I'm going to move this down. The book opens with a quote by the Renaissance writer Dorothy West. There is no life that does not contribute to history. There is no life that does not contribute to history. And because I'm the daughter of a song poet, my dad is a beautiful song poet in the Hmong tradition. It opens with a poem. I myself am not a poet. I'm merely a poet's daughter. But it starts with a poem. There was once a Hmong house that sat where two rivers met. The house was made of wood. There was a shingle bamboo roof on top. Out back, there was a garden filled with herbs and spices. In my memories, the house fills my heart. Remembering it makes me weep. One day I would return. This Hmong house would be full of people again. Mother would sit among the flowering mint in the garden. Father would stand by the door underneath the overhang of the roof. My brothers and sisters were bound. The living and the dead will be together at long last. There was once a Hmong house that where two rivers met. And the part that I'm going to read to you today is a difficult part because I don't like to make things easy for myself as a human being, as a mother, as a writer, as a teacher. Um, in this part of the my mother has given birth to me. I have an older sister. She's had all of these miscarriages because in Thailand, where the refugee people were only days a week, we were beyond years. Because Thailand was practicing a humane deterrence policy, there were many wars in Southeast Asia. All these refugee groups came in. They didn't want more refugees coming in. Only the rations. My mom, time I would look at her or my sister, she would give us the food in our hand, food from her mouth. So she has 6 miscarriages. And in all of that death, my mom started thinking that she wanted to visit the babies on the other side. And this is that attempt to visit the babies on the other side. At the camp market, only the earliest vendors have set up their stalls. The heavy butchers dividing the cuts of pork on a piece of bloody plastic over the roughly made wooden table with her big heavy Hmong knife. The congee woman had just taken the lid off of her pot as steam rises from its bubbling contents and blown into embers, glowing in the portable plate stove. The couple who sells live chickens have just unpacked the tired animals from the old rice sacks they used to transport them on their trucks and stuffed the metal cages full of white and brown feathered creatures. Down the line, the old toothless woman who sells fizzing pills is already set up. Her table is lined with small packets of capsules in little palm-sized zipped see-through plastic bags. She stands behind the table, a bent woman the size of a child in her heavy morning sweater. My feet cannot take my body to the table fast enough. My eyes run over the packets of blue pills, the capsules of red and green and blue, the familiar umbrella red of the Decolgin, the paracetamol that I have purchased many times for my girls when they battle colds and other ailments. There are uniform boxes of oils for the ills of the body, cooling menthol oils that are spicy and bitter to the taste buds, but open up airways and soothe away nausea. The table is full of remedies. My heart is pumping too fast. My breath is short and shallow. Tears I hadn't planned on shedding leak through. I wipe the corners. I wipe at the corners of my eyes like a child with my open palms. I straighten my lips into the familiar defense line, but it is quivering and unstable. I swallow the things. I swallow the thing that is trying to consume me. My throat feels parched and dry. The old woman looks up at me when I approach her table in my hurry. Her hair is pulled back with the familiar blue cloth common to Hmong women of her generation. My own mother used to wear a wrap just like hers. The vendor asks, "What can I get you today, young woman?" I tell her, "I'm looking for silver cleaning pills." She studies me. Her lids are curtains that have fallen low above her eyes. Her pink tongue comes out of her mouth. I tell myself to look only at her mouth. She has no more teeth. Her gums are pink as a baby's. Her tongue, too, is pink and it looks soft and wet. She licks her bottom lip again. I don't see what her eyes see. Her voice comes from far away, a slight carrying the words, "I don't have any left." I look down at the world of pills on her table. My gaze is once again so wet I can barely see. I'm mad at my tears. At this rate, I will be my own undoing. I don't even know what the pills look like. I remember them as circular and white, but I've only ever seen them in the hands of others. I feel a choking sensation at my throat. I tell her, please help me. The old woman says, I'm sorry, but I will not sell you any silver cleaning pills today. My right hand skims the surface above the nameless pills. I want my hand to be a magnet. I want the packet of pills to jump up into my fold. Nothing happens. The floating hand starts shaking. I can't control it. It is moving faster and faster. My hand is caught. The old woman's grip is firm. Suddenly, I'm a bird. I'm a girl again. My special nephew in America is a boy again. He hands me a bird he has caught. It is a little blue bird. It squeaks and cries its beaked mouth so I can see the triangle of red. I am gentle as he places the small, warm body in my hands. My fingers encircle me full of both of the old woman's hands are around mine. She engulfs my trembling hand like it is a fragile thing. Nothing more than a frightened crying now because I've lost my ability. Her pink tongue at her bottom lip again, but I don't see it. It is the sound that comes to me. I've met many toothless older people in my time. I try to pull my hand back a little to see if there is room to escape. Her hands refuse my weak attempt. A small, tight voice I don't recognize emerges from me. What other vendors carry the pills? The old woman is speaking very softly now, each word an island connected to the next by wind and water. I don't know. It is a long line of vendors from here until the end. You walk and you ask them. This lady does not have any for you today. All my life I'd fought to stay alive. Even before I knew it, I, like my daughters, had sucked at my mother's breast, hungry to grow. In all my memories of being hurt as a child, I'd run to my mother to let her know, to my brothers to inform them, each time searching for care. In the jungle years, I had somehow kept walking and holding on. In the lonely days, as a captive enemy, in the delivery of my first child, in the frantic flight after our rescue, even when my infected breast made me believe death was the natural conclusion, a piece of me had held on to life. Now that I was ready for death, this old woman was making it hard. I pull my hand with force. Hers offers no resistance this time, and sadness and free. The old woman tells me, I don't know whose daughter you are, or whose wife, or whose mother, but you will not get any silver cleaning pills from me on this day. Her voice becomes gentle. I will not let anyone sell you the pills today either. Gutu means hi. Gutu means hi, my daughter. I had heard it years ago from my mother in the moments when she wasn't addressing me, in the moments she was in conversation with another and Jew came up. In fact, I had just uttered the words last night by the fire to my own girls directly, first to Dao and then to Galia, identifying them as mine. I turn away from the old woman. I say with my back to her, you can't do that. I walk away. The woman who is me walks away, feet crisscrossing, stumbling, no dignity, no grace. The woman does not wipe away her tears. She cries openly, going from one vendor to the next, asking, pleading for silver cleaning pills. Her desperation is immense. Many of the don't even respond to words. They just shake their heads. A few take away from the open cries of the woman, and her proffered hands pushed together. The woman to die at Jumor. She is a woman with no name, her own. And that is a little bit from Where Rivers Part. My mother told me that I can write this book. She says, it's okay, you can write it if you want. Nobody will read it. Naturally, nobody will read it. The world is full of poor people, poor mothers, who have broken hearts. Who wants to read about another woman with a broken heart? My mother says to me, do you know how many times I've died so that I might live with you all? Do you know how many times I've died? My mother says to me, I don't ever want to be in the room when you're reading from that book because it will make me cry. And you will see me cry and you will cry too much. And you will never be able to read from that book. The book has now been in the world for several months. Thanks to the incredible independent booksellers across the Midwest and the Great Lakes region, it was a finalist for the Heartland Booksellers Award, as was The Rock in My Throat. We all know that writers know that award season is coming upon us. But it doesn't matter if I win or not. The fact that the book is written means that we've already won in the bigger game of life. That is the kind of writer before you. That is who I am. I tell family stories, and I tell them across genre lines. Yes, the picture books, and the adult memoirs, but also my debut middle grade fiction just came out on Tuesday, The Diamond Explorer. Because the moment I became a writer, the middle schoolers asked, "When are you going to write for us?" And I said, "Soon." It's taken me a while. And because they said, "Can you make it scary?" And I don't know about other writers, but for this writer, in order for me to scare my readers, I have to scare myself. And so, after lots of sleepless nights, this one is out with The Diamond Explorer. Brand new, it's only a week old, not quite even. So I've had a big year of publishing, a big year of writing, a big year of storytelling, and how grateful I am that this and Buffalo are two of my big trips. And then the year closes from Kao Kalia Yang. She's back to editing a young adult memoir that's going to come out in 2026 and two picture books that are slated for 2025. Which means that although I'm not very fast as a runner, my hands run quickly over the keyboards of time. But I'm here for you, and I want to give you plenty of opportunity to engage with me. You can see I'm not delivering a talk. I don't go to spaces, enter into places, because I want to throw words at you. I want to engage with you. So please talk to me, South Dakota and Minnesota. Yes, please,
I'll start.
please.
The subject that you address, so, of not in the first book, that of people not having something to say or not being able to say something. I think the title is beautiful, that something in your throat and you can't push it out. So I'm on the other side of that. I talk way too much. So, um, but one of the things I noticed is that, I want to exchange information. I want the other person to talk. But we have a certain, let's say, approach, the word these days, that if a person doesn't want to talk, we have to call. And I really have a problem with that because I know that I can see it in their eyes. They want to say something, but they can't. But I also want to be imposing at the same time and say, you have to say something, even if they're not ready. So from that other side, having experience, how do we reach out? How do we let you know that, okay, even if you're not ready to talk to me now, anytime you're ready to talk, and I'm ready to listen. How do we say it?
I love the generosity of this question. I'm going to try to paraphrase for everybody in the room, and you let me know if I'm getting it wrong. Um, but the question I think essentially is, how do we invite those who may not be ready to speak into conversation? You know, and I'll speak here as a teacher. From the moment I became a writer, I became a professor, and so I've been teaching for many years. And what I find to be true is that it can be very dangerous when somebody isn't ready to talk, to say, talk to me, it can be a very dangerous moment. I understand that we communicate in 1,000 different ways. I can tell you that as a selective mute across all of my St. Paul Public School, even Carleton College, even Columbia University, where I got my graduate degree, I didn't talk, but I sit in the front and I would follow the teachers with my eyes. And then I started noticing that when I was confused, the teacher somehow went over material to like they could see the confusion in my eyes. right? Without me saying a word, they can see the confusion in my eyes. And so then I'm like, wait, although I don't talk, I'm fulfilling kind of a purpose in this room. I'm contributing to the doing together. It gave me a different way to visualize myself, not merely as a victim of words, but as somebody who, with her eyes, was still speaking um, to the lack of clarity in a space, in a place. I believe that the best thing we can do is be engaged. I had a teacher, Miss Swanson, third grade teacher, St. Paul Public Schools, who every single day I come into the classroom, she asks me a question, and I never answered. Couldn't. But one day I had on this big old blue t-shirt that mom had gotten from a thrift store. And she said, "Why are you wearing such a big blue t-shirt?" And I love the question so much. I wrote it, I remember writing it in my diary, in my journal, and I answered her because I've never been to the ocean and I'm swimming in a sea of blue. That was my answer. All year long, Miss Swanson kept asking me questions that I never answered for her. And I can't tell you how many times as a child, and then even now as an adult, I go back to those moments and I talk to her in my memories. The reality is that each and every single one of us, we are characters in each other's books. And I get to ask myself every day, like for example, this morning, when we got up at the Comfort Inn, I said, what kind of character do I want to be today in the life of Jennifer, in the life of all these people I will meet? I don't believe that we just pass each other by. And so my concern is always that in the book of your life, that the character I am today is one that I want to be friends with, is one that I want to stand next to in a dark world, in a scary world. And so the question, I think, my response to the incredible question is always to be cognizant of who we are to that person. A smile goes a long way. A question goes a long way. The thing that we can't anticipate is how others will respond. But a question is always that, an invitation to engage. It's you telling me that you care about the things I have to say and that my perspective matters. The heart that you're giving me. And so I love questions as a way of engaging. Questions not necessarily expecting an answer, but I also love the fact that I get to ask myself every time I'm in the world, what kind of character do I want to be today? 10 years from now, 20 years from now, if you hear the name Kao Kalia Yang, what are you going to think about? An incredibly beautiful day in South Dakota, you know? You're going to think about this long woman with her hair in a ponytail, half streaked with white. You're going to think about, I think, my beautiful red dress. You're going to think about all of these things, and I think, what a beautiful thought that would be. What a beautiful memory that will be. Because memories, they're our friends forever. So that's my way of navigating. And you can see I'm just opening up my mind and thinking about the things that matter to you. These are the gifts that we have to give each other. Nothing's tried and tested because we're all still alive. And while the ending is pretty easy to see, oh, I get to peek around the corner and what great adventures are still in store. Right? Because we all know at this point, if we're lucky, then maybe 6 feet under, maybe we get to ride the wind and water for a little bit. The ending is not the surprise. The gift of life is that we get to check out the windows and the doors. We don't get to write each other's stories. My grandma used to say to me all the time, if you're any good, you get one line in the book of humanity. If you're any good at all, you get one line. What do you want that one line to be? And so I let these things guide me in how I meet others and how I engage with them. Anyone else? Yes, please.
Story. The son of what Central America means a lot. I never experienced it, but hearing the stories and hearing the conflicts and what happened to my relatives, it means a lot that you're telling the story. And when people come here from other countries, they might not have the resources to learn the language right away. having the ability to welcome them through a different medium is amazing. I want to
Thank you so much. And thank you for that really important reminder that unless you're Native Americans, we all in this room came from somewhere else to call this place home. And it wasn't so many generations ago that we spoke this English, heavy with the accents of our homelands, the circumstances of our stories. So thank you for your words. Anyone else? I know you all have met a lot of authors, um, this week. Are y'all gonna make it easy for me today? Do I get the, please?
So the phrase in your speaking as well, turning up and turning down the volume of drinks. I don't know what question I have formed around that, other than maybe speak a little bit about that concept a little further, whether how it came to you, was it, words you had to really think about how to describe, or just that idea of turning up and down our volume of listening is something that I think all of us do.
So often when you don't talk, and then when in college I learned how to whisper. When you're whispering, the thing people always say is, "Can you speak louder? Can you speak louder?" But how many times and how many rooms have all of us been in where we know that, the volume of listening isn't quite high enough, right? That people have control over their ability to listen as well. And so as a kid, people would say, "Speak louder," and I couldn't. But I could hear it. Sometimes when my mom is lecturing me, the volume of my listening is very low, and she knows it. She knows it. Um, it's true. And sometimes, when my cousins are talking, and I'm standing all the way back here, the volume of my listening is so high. I want to hear what they're talking about. And so as a kid, I knew that I could control the volume of my listening and that I could play with that dial in different ways. And I've done so in some moments to rescue my beating heart, and in other moments, right? So that I could listen to the strength of the wind and the flowers, the smell of the flowers outside around me. And so I think it's such an important reminder. Oftentimes we believe that we should ask others to speak louder, but we have to ask ourselves first, is there a way I could listen harder, listen better? So it's always been with me and I love it. And I think with so many selective mute students across this country, it's such an important reminder. But the reality is that even when you speak, I can ask you all in this room, how many times, despite your ability to speak, have you been grossly misunderstood? All of us, all of us, which is why I think I'm a writer. Because these really personal things are near and dear to me. I understand as an artist speaks to the experience of being human for everyone. Oftentimes people will say, "I came to your talk because I want to learn about the Hmong story." "Oh, but you were so surprising because I learned something about myself." And I'm like, every author, no matter what we're writing about, every artist, no matter what we're painting or phot- photographing, it is the human experience of life that we're trying to capture. It is the pulse of humanity that we're trying to feel. And so, yeah, I, I know now, especially because I'm a mother as well, when my kids play with the volume of their listening, yeah, it's very frustrating. But I also understand it's because they're testing out that tool. They need testing ground. And who better to test it on than us? And this is my husband. And so lots of testing going on all the time with identical twins who are 9 and a daughter who's 11. Yes, please.
what anecdotes do you have for using these stories as an intellectual vehicle for understanding and change among different groups? Because each group is going to be different. How have you seen these texts being used to form new understanding and collectives among different groups of people?
That's such a good question. For me, I started out by saying that my second book, The Song Poet about my dad, became an opera. I'm a kid, born in a refugee camp, raised in the housing projects in the falling down neighborhoods of St. Paul. I'm a kid who didn't have access to operas. I remember being in college at Carleton College and And there was this program that was going to take us to the opera, poor kids to the opera for the first time. And so naturally, I was one of them. Got there and I fell asleep. I woke up when the music had ended. I knocked out the whole time and I thought, oh no, this is so embarrassing. Opera's not for me. And then when I was in New York City studying at Columbia, you pay $5 and you get to go see the great operas. So naturally, pay my $5 and the same thing would happen. I go and the music would start and I would knock out. And then I wake up embarrassed, feeling like I'd done something really wrong. When the Minnesota Opera connected with me and they said, you're writing the stuff of great operas. The song poet, can we adapt it for an opera? I thought, the Song Poet is a book about a song poet, my dad, who sings incredibly beautifully. It belongs in that medium. So I said, okay, yes, please. So they paid a very expensive librettist from New York. Didn't even know what a librettist was, but you learned a lot in the process. To read the book and then write an adaptation. When I read the adaptation, it was horrendous. It didn't speak to the love that I have for my father or the stories that we come from. And I knew as an artist who's worked so hard to find my voice that it would be an atrocity to let that go into the world. So I said, you can't. Just look at all of these things. And then they started looking at each other. Then who's going to write this libretto? And then everybody looked at me. And I thought to myself, if I say no, then I will be saying to some poor kid somewhere that simply because you've never had the opportunity to learn of something, you can't do it. So I said, yes, if you are willing to open up your team to me, if you let me see not only what happens in front of the curtain, but what happens behind it, if you let me see your librettos, then I will adapt my book into an opera for you. And I did it. And the crew that came to the opera, so 6 months before premiere date, it was all sold out. All the tickets were sold out. And I said, I really want Hmong people to be able to come. So they were really wonderful. They opened up the dress auditions. And I went to the auditions for the main roles, and I can tell you it was at the Ordway. And so we had people flying in from other countries, and they're coming here. They're in like fancy gowns. This skinny 15-year-old Hmong boy walks in shorts and a t-shirt one day, and he says, "I hear that there's a Hmong opera being adapted. I like to sing." And he's shaking, but he's looking at me, and I'm looking at him. This is a pandemic, so we're all masked, only my eyes. And we're sitting along this table, and he goes and he's just looking at me. And so I'm looking at him, and he opens his mouth and he starts singing. He didn't do a great job, but he sang in that room full of everybody else. And I thought, like, tears started leaking out of my eyes. This is why I do what I do. So beyond an intellectual exercise for me, to see my artwork in different forms and to begin to engage with it in different ways, that opens up audiences. There are people who've seen that opera who never read the book. There are people who hear me talk who would never pick up my books. There are people who read me who would never see me talk in person. It's incredible. But I can tell you that there is no night that I go to bed where I don't wake up to a new review of my work from somewhere in the world or an email from an inbox somewhere. One of the most moving stories that I can tell you about, there was this big I have so many of these stories, but there's this one where I am visiting a tiny elementary school in Wausau, Wisconsin. And my first book, A Map into the World, had just come out. So it's my first children's book. And I go and I do a reading. And it's a mostly white school because this is Wausau, Wisconsin. And right when I'm done, this kid raises his hand. I say, yes, you. And he says, you are the author that I've been waiting for. And I said, I am? And this kid says, yes, because I've been waiting my whole life to see what compassion can do. This is a fourth grader. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'm so happy to be the writer that you've been waiting for. That night, there was a community component. As with most of my talks, there's always try to build community components. And that evening, lo and behold, this kid shows up. But he shows up with a teenager who's sulking, wearing all black. And he comes up with a scrap of paper this big and says, can you give me your autograph? So I gave him my autograph, and his teacher sees this. So she comes with the index card and says, can you please give your autograph, and I'll make sure that he gets it. So I'm like, okay. So I signed it for him again. and I do my evening presentation, and lo and behold, when I say, okay, does anybody have any questions? This kid raises his hand again. I'm like, yes. He's like, I needed you, but I know somebody who needed you more than me, and that's my brother. He thinks that the world's a very sad place, and we have many reasons to believe it is. But I knew that he needed to hear you. And I looked, and this teenager, all wearing black, is smiling. The biggest smile. And I came home. And if you had asked me before that trip who the readers who needed to meet me are, I would never have pegged this white kid in Wausau, Wisconsin. And but this is the beauty of the arts. It speaks. It speaks. And so, of course, I sent this kid a book, sign a book and send it to the principal to make sure that it got to the kid. But I can tell you 10,000 different variations of this story across my travels, places where nobody knows who the Hmong are, and places where everybody is Hmong. And that is why I'm an artist. That is why when people ask me, who are you writing for? My first answer is first for those who would understand, and then those who wouldn't. Because a writer needs heart to do this kind of work, especially if she is like me and she just stands, with no notes to read. She needs heart. So yeah, I've seen it, choral compositions, raps, plays, lots of things, all of my books. And it's been such a gift for me. I'm not leaving the train a writer. I'm not just visiting. I once told my dad, Daddy, if I can't make it as a writer, I would really go back to medical school. Because like generations of immigrants and refugees, mom and dad thought we needed doctors and lawyers. Lawyers, they defend the rights that we don't have enough of. Doctors heal what is broken in the human body. But I told my daddy recently, what I do with words is no different than what I would have done with medicine. I want to use them to heal what is broken in the human heart. So there's no medical school in my future. But Carleton was nice. This year they gave me an honorary doctorate. And my mom and dad were there for the commencement and everything. So in different ways, I think we deliver on the promises that we make to those who love us. Not always in the easiest, and not always on the kindest timelines, but we deliver in different ways. I'm still that little girl in Bambina refugee camp who saw the world from my father's shoulders. Long before a bike or a car, it was my father's shoulders that I rode on. I'm still that kid who my dad says is like the dog after the scent of a bone. I don't know when to let go. Some things never change, And I think that is why I stand before you. In America, it is harder to become a professional artist than it is to become a professional athlete. There's absolutely no indication that I have any athleticism in me. But I've been able to survive as a writer because I'm incredibly tenacious, because I'm willing to try new things all the time and to grow, because I understand that if I need the world to give me a chance, I have to learn how to give myself a chance first. People are always like, if this next book isn't the one, I'm like, then there's a next one and the next one. You're gonna see me in your bookstores. You're gonna see me on your library shelves. You're gonna get to meet me because I've been trying to get to you forever. Yes, please.
That's a good point with medicine. You could use the analogy, words are kind of like stitches. They can mend together the chasms of pain and the chasms of hurt around the world. And so using, your medium of words, you're also using it to stitch together the pains and wrongs that are happening.
I hope so. Except when we fight, then you try to make the words as sharp as possible. This happens in every marriage. Yes. Anybody else before I let you enter into these incredible gardens? I don't know how it worked out. Don't know how you all know how much I love growing things, but it does my heart so much good. So thank you. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for the incredible work that you all do to uplift so many voices, so many stories. And I'm happy to sign your books. I have a beautiful signature because I studied the American Constitution in 9th grade in Mr. Caval's history IB class, and I fell in love with John Hancock's signature. And so I spent hours training myself. So So I have a beautiful signature if anyone's interested. Thank you. Thank you.